Hey everybody, today we're going to be simulating the difference between raster and vector images using Adobe Photoshop and some graph paper. Let's get started. We're going to start by heading to the assignment page where we'll find the white graph paper PDF. We can download this image by clicking on it, going to the three dots at the top right, clicking on that and selecting Open in New Window. From here, we'll select Download at the top right of the screen. And that should start the download right away. We're going to now go ahead and find Finder. But let's get all this out of the way first by hitting the yellow button at the top left to get rid of this. I'm going to select Finder, the smiley face icon on your taskbar. From here, we're going to go to Downloads on the left-hand side. We're going to find the white graph paper.pdf that we just downloaded. If you don't see it on here, make sure you select Date Added or Date Created, and if you hit that a couple times, it should pop up at the top of your list. I'm going to go ahead and drag this into my folder that we created earlier. And just not letting go of my mouse here, I'm holding it right above by clicking and dragging. I'm going to hold this above our class, and we can just put that into Photoshop for now. I'm going to create a new folder now, just so we have this all tidy in one spot. To do that, I'm going to go up to File and select New Folder, and I'm going to call this Raster versus Vector. Just by typing that in and hitting Return, we can save what we typed. I'm going to drag the white graph paper into the Raster versus Vector, just by clicking and dragging and letting go of it on top of our folder. Now I'm going to go into that folder, and we're finally ready to go ahead and get started with Adobe Photoshop. Holding down Control on our keyboard, I'm going to click on the white graph paper PDF, and then let go of Control. I'm going to go down to Open With and select Adobe Photoshop. Now on the systems that we have here, our iMacs, it might be a little bit slow, but it will open eventually, and you should come to a screen that looks just like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit by using Command+. And we can see that we have just some plain simple graph paper, the same kind of thing that you might use in math class. We're going to be using this graph paper to simulate the difference between raster and vector images. We're going to start off by creating a raster image. To do this, we're going to go to our Shapes tools on the left. And if you don't see this rectangle, you can hold down in the same general area. You might see any of these same tools on your toolbar instead, the ellipse tool, the triangle tool, the polygon tool. They're all kind of hidden in the same spot. So if you see any sort of shape with an outline, that's probably what you want. Hold your mouse down on that and select Rectangle tool. Just to make sure we have the right color selected, we're going to hit this black and white box right here. It's the small one, not the big one that you want. And this just makes sure that we have this set to black and white for now. I'm going to go ahead and click anywhere on my graph paper here, just once, without dragging. And we should see this box come up that says Create Rectangle. For the width, I'm going to type in 16. And for the height, I'm going to type in 16. Now I'm going to hit OK. And this just created our first rectangle. I'm going to zoom in on it by hitting Command+ again. And you'll see that we have this outline right now. This isn't quite looking how we want it to, so we're going to shift some settings around. At the top, where it shows Fill, I'm going to hit this drop-down box, and we can select whatever color we want. So I'll select red, for example, under RGB. Or, if you want to get a little bit more specific, we can click on this box right here, or to select a custom color. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it comes up with this color picker fill color right here. So maybe I want to start with a green instead. So I'm going to slide along here until I see green. And I'm just going to pick what type of green I want. I'm going to do a very vibrant green, but you can choose whatever color you want. We're going to select OK. And now you'll see that our box has turned green. Right now we have a black line around it, and that's not what we want. So let's get rid of that. I want to go up to where it says Stroke and click on this box here. Yours may look a little different, but it should be in the same spot. After we click on stroke, we're going to select no stroke by hitting this white box with a line through it, and that will get rid of our stroke. We can get rid of this menu now by clicking on stroke one more time. Lastly, we're going to switch to our move tool. The move tool right here is what we use to, well, move things around. So I'm going to move this until it's lined up with the edges of this box. Now, it's not looking quite right to me, so I'm going to zoom in farther, hitting Command+, because the more we zoom in, the more accurately it's going to let us place our squares. I'm going to move this, and it's still trying to move it a little bit too much. Now, here's where we're able to use some backup techniques. I'm going to use my arrow keys, up, down, left, or right, in order to move this around. And you'll see I hit my right arrow key once, and now it fits just perfectly inside of this box. So I'm going to repeat this process a few times, going to the shape tool, clicking on our graph paper. It should keep our settings of 16 by 16, that's perfect. We'll hit OK, and then we're going to go back to our move tool, and we're going to move this into the box. And we're going to keep doing this process a few times, creating a new square, and moving it. And our whole goal here is that we're going to be using this to make some art. So you might have to get a little creative on what you want to be creating here. It might make sense to go ahead and try to find some reference images online of maybe an album cover that you really like, that you want to try recreating just using colored squares. Let's talk about the colors on these squares for a second though. What if we wanted to change the color of our square to better match our artistic vision? To do that, we're going to use our direct selection tool. That's this black one right here. We're going to click on this, and then click on our square, go up to fill, hit our custom color again, and now I can change the color to, let's try pink. And you'll see that that has changed the color of my box here. So again, I'm just going to create a few more of these shapes here. Hitting OK, switching to the move tool, and moving it where I want it. Selecting my box, clicking on the graph, 16 by 16 is perfect. And I'm going to switch this one to green, hitting fill at the top, going back to here. And if I click on a color that we've already used on here, it will allow us to copy that exact color, which is super helpful. I'm going to hit OK, go back to the move tool, and move this back into position here. So here's a few more. Using my arrow keys to get it in the right spot. And one more here. 16 by 16, perfect. Going back to my move tool on the top left, dragging this to the right spot. And now if I zoom out, hitting Command minus, you'll see that we're starting to create a design by just using these colored squares on this graph paper. So what we're seeing here is a representation of a raster image. A raster is just a map of each and every little individual pixel of your screen and saying what color it's supposed to be. So you'll see that this is a very blocky design. For the second stage of our process here, we're going to recreate our same design that we made in this box right here. And we're going to create it over on this side. This time we're going to be recreating a vector image. To do this, we're going to use our brush tool instead of just using the blocks. So I'm going to go to my brush by finding it on my bar. And the shortcut for this is B on your keyboard. Made it a little bit easier to find it there, and that will select my brush. So with our brush selected, we're going to need to create a new layer in order to start adding paint. I'm going to hit plus. And you'll see that this has created a new layer. And if I start to just click and drag, you'll see that starts to allow me to paint. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that real quickly. All right, so our goal is going to be to recreate our art piece from the left side over on the right using our brush. We can change the color of our brush by clicking on this colored box down here. It's currently a black square. We're going to go over and select our color dropper on here again. Perfect. And I'm going to just start to paint along here. And I think my brush might be a little bit too big right now, so I'm going to undo that by hitting Command Z again. And let's make that brush a little smaller. We're going to go to this drop down at the top, slide it to the left a little bit, and let's try that same 16 pixels that we were using earlier. We can just type that in. All right, and let's give this one more go here. So I'm going to start by drawing the first part of my design here, switching to that red color, selecting that, and we're going to continue our line here. And again, switching back to the green for our upstroke, hitting OK, and just continuing right up along to finish our design. Now, your design will hopefully be a little bit more complex than this. I know I have some very talented artists in my class, and I would love to see what you're able to bring to the table. The main focus that we're trying to study here, though, is how these two look different. On the left, as we mentioned before, is our raster image. It's kind of like thinking of we have to color inside of the lines at all times. You see that these perfectly fill the squares, and we're never allowed to only partially fill a square. They all have to be 100% filled or 0% filled. There is no middle ground at all. On the right-hand side, we're allowed to color outside of the lines a little bit. This is what a vector image does. It allows us to use curved lines in order to create our images. So instead of saying that these have to be 100% on or 100% off, this is in a little bit of a gray area. Vector images are created using basic shapes in order to make a finished image. And that really is exemplified in our piece here. To turn this in, we're going to go up to File at the top, select Export, Export As, and we're going to do JPG. That's just fine. We're going to select Export. We're going to go to Desktop, find our name on the list, our current class, go to Photoshop, Raster versus Vector, and I'm just going to call this Raster versus Vector, Mark for my first name here, and we're going to hit Save. Now we always save these two different ways, so I'm going to make sure I go up to File, Save As, and then again go to Desktop, scroll down to my name, my class, Photoshop, Raster versus Vector, and again we're going to call this just Raster versus Vector and our first name. Before we hit Save though, make sure you hit this drop down arrow and select Photoshop. This is very important, so please make sure you do this and select Save. We're going to hit OK. For now, I'm going to close Photoshop. We're going to go back to Desktop on the left, scroll down to our name, Advanced Studio Production, Photoshop, Raster versus Vector, and you'll see that we have two versions on here. We have the JPEG, which is 35 kilobytes, and we have the PSD file, which is 907 kilobytes. This year, I will only be accepting JPG files for Photoshop assignments unless stated otherwise. So if you get an assignment returned to you with a comment saying, please give me the JPG so I can give you your points, just know I am only accepting JPG files for Photoshop this year. It makes things much, much easier. So this is the one that we're going to want to turn in. But other than that, thank you for watching. I hope this helped to gain a little bit of an understanding on Raster versus Vector and kind of what that looks like visually. And I will see you all back in class. Bye now.